So I've got a piece going up on Texas football. It's Math Tuesday.
Math Tuesday. Thank you. I was really concerned you weren't going to say it,
Sorry.
and my heart was starting to hurt.
Sorry. I've got a piece going up on TexasFootball.com today about the top returning receivers in Texas high school football heading into the 2022 season. And it's a weird... Talking about receivers is an odd conversation simply because they are so much at the mercy of who's throwing them the ball.
Right.
And it's one of those classic football chicken and egg situations. And I would say it's even more stark than like you hear this all the time that great running backs are nothing without a great offensive line.
But that's not necessarily true.
I would say that but I don't know. It's a little bit odd that I think there's a different dynamic between running or wide receivers and their quarterbacks. I would use the example of a guy like Braden Locke. Braden Locke was the quarterback for Rockwall from 2019, 2020, 2021. In 2019, he really broke on the scene, and thanks in large part to
Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Right? He threw nearly half of his 4,300 yards to Jackson Smith-Njigba. So, obviously, I don't think it goes without saying that the wide receiver who is at the Ohio State and started in the Rose Bowl made Braden Locke look good.
Yeah.
But also, Braden Locke went on to throw for another 6,800 yards over the next 2 seasons.
And you have to get it there before they can really be counted as receiving yards.
And so it wasn't even it was kind of that's a perfect example of it's a symbiotic relationship between receivers and quarterbacks. And so you've got to have both. You've got to have both. I think that you can have the number one receiver in the country, but if you don't have a quarterback or you don't have, let's say, the right scheme, then it doesn't matter. You can also have the best quarterback in the state.
Yeah, that would have been like Jackson Smith-Njigba playing for a slot T team.
Exactly
right. What's the purpose there?
But you can also have the best quarterback in the state. But if nobody can catch the ball, then it doesn't necessarily matter. So there's a strange symbiotic relationship, and I found that kind of breaking down the receivers is the toughest one of these three to break down. The other two, I think, are a little bit self-evident and stuff. There's a little bit of more nuance, I think, that goes into talking about the receivers. And so let's talk a little bit about the most decorated receivers coming back, the most productive receivers coming back in 2022. And some of these are going to be, I think, a little bit interesting. We'll start with the gentleman who is the leading receiver in Texas high school football, returning to 2022, in 2022, and that's Lonnie Atkinson. Lonnie Atkinson, the wide receiver at Corpus Christi Miller. He was fantastic in 2020 as a sophomore. He was terrific in 2021, and now he returns as the state's leading returning receiver. And remember, he did that with two different quarterbacks.
Yeah.
He did with Andrew Body in 2020, and now Jayden Brown in 2021. And by the way,
Jayden Brown was on our quarterback list.
Jayden Brown's coming back. So that's certainly noteworthy that you're going to have one of the top returning quarterbacks throwing to the top returning wide receiver. The second place, maybe you go to somewhere you didn't think about, which is El Paso Eastwood. And their quarterback or their wide receiver Curtis Murillo, who was outstanding as a junior and will come back as a senior there for the Troopers. And they have to replace a quarterback. Andrew Martinez is gone, but they are the style of offense that they run out there is going to be pretty high octane.
And what, they made it to the third round?
I believe that's correct. They made it to the third round. Jordyn Tyson. Maybe, we didn't talk a ton about Allen last year. I think just because by Allen standards, it was only an okay year.
Yeah, they lost a district game.
Right.
So that.
But they did have one of the most prolific receivers in the state in Jordyn Tyson, who very nearly got to 1,500 yards last year. He's actually the third leading receiver coming back and a guy who will have his quarterback coming back. Then you have 4 and 5. And we group those guys together because, well, they play for the same team. And this is rather remarkable. I can't remember this happening, where you had two guys in Trajan Butler and Darian Gillette who are the number 4 and number 5 returning receivers in the state, both coming back, and also their quarterback's coming back. He was on there. Desmond Woodson was on when we did the top 10 returning passers. We talked about him. He's coming back. And so if you want to buy some stock into a team, Marlin, at least the offensive side, is looking pretty darn good. I would say probably the most underrated guy, and maybe the most underrated guy on this list, comes in at number 6, and David Charo, the wide receiver from Seymour, who led 2A in receptions last year, all of 2A, as a sophomore, and he is now the 6th leading receiver returning. Landon Ransom is kind of in that same way. We talked a little bit about his quarterback, Jacob Wilson, when we talked about the quarterbacks. I believe he was 3rd or 4th as far as leading receivers coming back. And he's going to have his number 1 target back in Landon Ransom, who is a 1,400-yard receiver. Rowan Fluellen helped guide Gilmer to a state championship game. He will be back, although he will have a new quarterback with Brandon Tennyson off to the next level. In the Central Texas area, Little River Academy had Scout Brazil, who was really outstanding for the Bumblebees, and then down in Port Neches Groves, Chance Prosperi, the wide receiver for PNG, really paced the Indians' high-powered attack last year, and will be back for another go-around here at Port Neches Groves down there in the Golden Triangle. What is interesting, there are in total 18 receivers who had at least 1,200 yards receiving last year that are coming back for another season.
Wow.
The ones who didn't make the list, Lewis Williams from Conroe, Devin Matthews from Seguin, Kyle Koch from Dripping Springs, who's going to have Austin Novosad throwing back to him, Jaden Greathouse from Austin Westlake, which is pretty remarkable considering, like,
I feel like that's a name we've heard for the past 800 years.
Right, well, because he started as a freshman, for sure.
But he won't have Cade Klubnik.
He won't have Cade Klubnik, but I have no doubt that they'll find a quarterback there at Westlake. Jayden Porter, the sophomore sensation there at Lorena, was a 1,200-yard receiver. Another El Paso kid, El Paso Franklin's Bo Sparks, was a 1,200-yard passer. Amarian Henry from Keller was a 1,200-yard receiver. And then staying in the DFW Metroplex and rounding out the 1,200-yard receivers who are coming back, Walker Mulkey, the wide receiver from Flower Mound, is back. And so there's 18 guys who, if you expand it to 1,000, there's a few other guys who got to the 1,000-yard mark. But I think it's interesting, and I would say at first glance, and I don't have this in front of me, but I would say at first glance, about half of these guys, maybe a little more than half of these guys, have their quarterback coming back.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that was kind of the most shocking thing of as we're going down that list. Oh, he's back, and he's back, and he's back.
Yeah, Lonnie Atkinson's got his quarterback back. Jordyn Tyson's got his back. Trajan Butler and Darian Gillette have their quarterback back. Landon Ransom, for sure, have their quarterback back. There may be a couple of others on that top 10 that are going to have guys back. And then, as we mentioned, Austin Novosad, the Baylor commit, is back for Dripping Springs to throw to Kyle Koch. So there's a lot of big-time receiving talent in the state of Texas that is back for another season that's kind of established. And what I think is interesting, this is the only place, by the way, if you're interested in this kind of thing, I believe this is the only category we went through that has that the state's leading receiver is not back after last year. And you take a look at the leading receiver in 2021 rather. I can look this up really quickly. I believe it was. Oh, this is hard to do on the fly. But there was, I'm sure. Oh, Coy Aiken from Stephenville.
Yes.
Was the state's leading receiver.
Because Ryder Lambert is back, but Coy is
Lambert is back, but Coy Aiken will not be. Coy Aiken was a 2,100-yard receiver last year. So he will not have the, Coy Aiken is gone. He's off to Texas Tech. But we will see, how they replace the weaponry on the outside for Ryder Lambert. But again, it's one of those things where for a receiver to be productive, there's got to be a variety of different things that come through. And so, yeah, that is going to be. It's very interesting. Coy Aiken was, I believe, the 9th guy in UIL Texas high school football 11-man history to top 2,000 yards receiving. So they will have to replace that, but they'll certainly have weaponry out there at Stephenville, and we know they'll have a quarterback. So interesting to take a look at. That's a piece going up on TexasFootball.com, the top returning Texas high school football receivers in 2022. Hey, thanks for watching this clip here on YouTube. If you like this kind of stuff and you want more of it, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, you can watch us live every weekday at noon at TexasFootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, or here on YouTube. And if you want more of the best coverage of football in the state of Texas, check out TexasFootball.com and become a Dave Campbell's Texas Football Insider at TexasFootball.com/subscribe.